Darwin.
Take it away, RJ.
Hey, and thank you again, Scientist Mel, for hosting. It's always a joy to see the plethora of Doctor Who and Pac-Man and Wonder Woman and Groot and all the other miscellaneous stuff that's in the background on there. But as you all know, I'm continuing the slog through replacing Darwin, Nathaniel Jeanson's a screed about why everybody's less than 6,000 years old, and the human beings and all of that, and his genetic arguments. It's got a hard cover, so it must be true. And
You think
yeah.
you have a bad
As a note from chat and from me turning on the audio in the stream, RJ is very quiet on the stream, but he's fine in here.
Oh,
RJ, you think you've had problems? I literally talked to a guy whose entire refutation for whose literally entire defense for Electric Universe, when proven to be wrong, was quite literally, "Wah, I'm right, you're wrong.
yeah.
Wah."
Well, it could be argued that that is going to be the defense from anybody who tries to defend the electric universe, since it's head up their ass wrong. So
No,
there's no.
he actually got shown where he was. The guy who I had encountered actually got shown where he was wrong when he claimed that comets were not ice and water, but in fact rock, with electrochemical reactions in the rocks being responsible for the tails. But
Did you quiz him for where he was getting his source material from?
well, actually, his entire source material, as far as I can tell, was literally his own ass.
Well, that's an important thing. I mean, it's always good to specify whether you're dealing with somebody that's actually drawing on somebody else's twaddle and they're merely repeating it. Standing for Truth falls into that category, or is making up as we go along. The electric universe is a really fringe thing that goes back in a lot of different iterations and interconnects with an awful lot of pseudoscience and that. So there's several little spots where they might be trawling this stuff. And if they're a modern internetist, they could be getting it from somebody that was a YouTube lecturer or whatever. But always make a point of that. That's the essence of source methods, which leads me clumsily into a side issue before I get off onto replacing Darwin in here. And it shows what I do in my tip work and how the way my mind works and how things lead off to one another thing. A paleoanthropologist I follow on Twitter just happened to drop a picture of a woolly rhinoceros sculpture that was done in ceramics 30,000 years ago at Dolní Věstonice in Czechoslovakia, which I had not heard about before. It turns out to be the oldest ceramics that are known. They're just very rudimentary ceramics, but nevertheless, they did that as a thing. Well, I hadn't heard about that. So I began to track down all the material. There was it turns out it was not a terribly recent finding. 1989, there was a science article on it that had worked on it. And that's when I discovered more about the Gravititian phrase, Gravettian, that came after the Orgnithian. That's around 30,000 years ago. It's in Europe. And then there's a bunch of Paleolithic sites from that area. It's where dogs, one of the domestication zones for dogs, which we mentioned in book 1 of our little tome. The rocks were there, that I hope everybody is spreading the word on and getting it if you can, and anticipating with salivation volume 2, which we will be working on later in the year with Jackson, and get that out hopefully in 2021. And then it relates to a bunch of issues about human creativity and how far that goes back, and whether that can be crammed into the flood scenario or post-flood dispersal and Tower of Babel and all the claptrap that goes on in that area. It also connects up with human demographics that we can now see, because these are relatively recent remains, and so they're able to do DNA analyses and things on them that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And the fact that it isn't showing up in the creationist literature, I think, is rather funky. So anyway, that's going to be a little side issue. And the fact that I can print things up and eat at the same time, that's such a joy to be able to do that. Thank you. I will be thanking all the Patreons that have made that possible to do. Save a PDF and then you print up just like the first page or whatever little side issues. I often will print up like, on the second page, I might put a particular, how did I do one of these little puppies in here? Is there one in here? No. Yeah, well, anyway, sometimes I'll stick a material from a map or something like that that gives a greater clarification on it. But it would be idiotic to print up the full text of everything but it is handy just to have that document that you can deal with on that. So that's of the presage, that stuff is going to be on here. Oh, Lisa for Truth asks, is there any way I can access Nature and Science without having to pay? What you want to do on that is, the one way is if you have any access to a college library, you can probably go into the college library once we get past social distancing. And even though you aren't a student, you can probably gain access to a lot of their material and just have, and for the cost of the nominal printing, or they will download it as a PDF. You can do those sorts of arrangements. Then that's the laborious route. The other one is type out the title of the paper itself and Google it. And you may find that, especially
Google Scholar is your friend.
If it's an older paper, odds are probably half of the time, at least, it's going to be posted somewhere, either on a college website where it's part of their curriculum, or it's going to be posted at ResearchGate or Academia EDU and those sorts of things. And occasionally, you have to remember, some of the technical paper, particularly recent genetic work, even at Science and Nature, will be put up as a full text freebie. So you can find that, hunt around for the title of the text that way. And that's one of the maneuvers, because as somebody who doesn't have money to buy all of this stuff, I can't afford to be subscribing to Science and Nature. I'd love to, but nonetheless.
Oh, speaking of source methods, someone was actually nice enough to give me their sources without even asking for them. Unfortunately, they happen to be a total moon landing denier crank. But still, did you know that he actually asked, as evidence of the moon landing, that the people who landed on the moon actually create a hypergolic explosion to prove they were there? Now, I'll tell you why there's a problem with that. Simple.
The lack of evidence?
Well, no, it's not just that. It's the fact of the matter that there's only one hypergolic craft that's going to be on the moon. Guess what that is?
I think it's the Apollo stuff.
Yeah, and more importantly, what happens when you blow up a hypergolic craft with another with a separate staged hypergolic craft still on top of it?
You just leave what's left.
Yeah, of course, detonating a hypergolic craft is going to turn it into a hair trigger bomb, and shrapnel is going to be flying all over the place.
Well, let's not be too worried about that. But anyway, the thing about it, finding the sources available on another way of doing is contact the scientists that wrote the paper. And you will probably be surprised to find out they're perfectly happy to funnel you the text of that, especially if it's one that's been out for a few years. So if you look in the abstracts in Science and Nature, you'll find the sort of lead author email that you can use for direct contact on it, and go ahead and do that. And odds are that you'll get the paper that way. So there are umpteen different sneaky paths to do. So that means that I know from personal experience that since I can find the damn things, that means every creationist should theoretically be able to find them, and any other scholar that wants to fact check on the things. You can see in the work that I do here on the show that I try to put up primary source links. It's never to an abstract. It's always to the full technical paper somewhere or other that you can gain access to. And there's a lot to get. So plow away. There's many tricks to deal with on that.
Gee, it's almost as if you care about the information content.
Yeah, and fun. It's fun too. That it's exciting and interesting, and it's so much more exciting and interesting than the little fairy tale versions that you get on these things. That when you start scratching into it, it's like the difference between a really great work of music and somebody who can't sing, just kind of riffing, and they don't really know what they're doing. That's what you get at that lower level. And so I'd much rather have the magnificent stuff rather than the jerky material. Well, enough of all that little side issues, and that'll be a teaser for the fact that there's going to be tons of material on human evolution and the history of the species, going all the way back to Homo erectus times, the distribution of them, which the creationists like to just think they're just perfectly normal human beings, but they're not quite our species yet. Anyway, back to our exciting world of Jeanson and replacing Darwin. Here he went on, let me see if I can find, there's my little batch. He's continuing on with a generic layout of the overall system of how they worked out that DNA was involved in inheritance, that proteins were made out of amino acids and that those were encoded for, and that all of the system of working that. And it took a long time on stuff, but he couldn't really resist pressing his luck a bit farther than he should as he dives into some of this stuff. Fortunately, a chunk of this material was actually available full text, so I was able to share a little bit of it. But he happened to bring up a bit on the late 1940s and early 1950s, the British biochemist Frederick Sanger was establishing that proteins have a specific sequence of amino acids. By 1956, German-born Vernon Ingram in Cambridge, England, demonstrated that the sickle cell protein chain was in the specific amino acid sequence of the protein hemoglobin. Oh, do you really want to bring up sickle cell, which is not merely that it's a point mutation that generates it, it's that it's a deleterious mutation that is sustained in the population as a scorched earth defense, that it happens to defend against malaria accidentally. So in environments where malaria is a problem, there's a selection pressure that even though sickle cell anemia is dangerous for you, if you get both your parents inheriting from both your parents, you're screwed. You will have sickle cell anemia. But if it's just one of the alleles, you can flip along in the chromosome and you don't necessarily display it. And so people who carry the trait aren't necessarily suffering from anemia, but they are more deflected against. It happens to screw up malaria. Now, if you have a population, this has occurred several times in the history of human beings. One of the groups is in Africa, and there were an awful lot of Africans that got taken to America, not by their desire. And so they are now moving from an environment where malaria was common to one where it isn't. And that's when it starts showing up that selection pressure for the sustaining of it starts dropping. And now you have, particularly in Black Americans, a higher incidence of sickle cell anemia, and it's not beneficial anymore relative to protecting you against something worse that is malaria. Now, all of this is an instant theodicy problem. Why is malaria designed to begin with? Was it designed? Why the alleles? Why can't you design a system if you want to protect against the malaria that you designed to begin with? Why couldn't you make a system that will be not producing a downside? This reminds me of the old movie, I think Time Bandits, where Ian Holm is playing Napoleon, and he's talking about Alexander the Great, a little short 5'2", and he's talking about all the heights of people. And at one point, he likes to watch the Punch and Judy shows because he likes to see little people hitting other little people. And that's the impression that you get if it's a designer, that it's a designer that has kind of a weird sadistic streak. Now, since he brought up sickle cell, I'm going to be seeing whether or not he ever touches on it again. Because remember, we don't have an index in the book. We don't have a reference bibliography. So to know what's percolating downstream, we don't know. But since he brought that up, he's got a problem right off the bat. Now, another one that he was discussing is just a generic background source. Had to do with Beadle and Tatum, who were the ones that came up with one enzyme, one gene back in the 1940s. And they did an experiment on fungi. And fortunately, the paper, I think, was fully available. So I put that up as a link because it's kind of funky to deal with some of these historical. No, it's a 1902 paper that was even earlier. This other guy, let me see. I think Vernon Ingram. Where are we? Archibald Gerald. That's it. 1902. I'll get to Gerald in a minute. But anyway, the Beadle and Tatum stuff is kind of interesting because there's more to it than that. And it turns out that Beadle plays a big role in the development of figuring out the evolution of maize, aka corn, if you're in the United States. I doubt he's going to mention that part up. So I put up a neat little retrospective from 2001 by John Dobley on George Beadle's other hypothesis, the maize matter. And this was one where they were doing genetic information as to where things were coming up and how traits were inherited. And even though they didn't know as much as they would later on, they were basically saying that the prevailing model of how maize originated was wrong, and that it was from something that didn't look very corn-like at all initially to start with, and that turned out to be correct. And so it's history, tracing the history of that idea, and that sometimes acrimonious debates back and forth between the various camps over the years into the 21st century. So that was another one where, Jeanson, you should probably be careful about who you bring up. And this was the matter that connected up with this Archibald Gerald. I find out about all these people that I didn't know because they were a long time ago. You almost wonder why Jeanson is making a point of bringing up these very old characters. Archibald Gerald was born in 1857 and died in 1936. And he was one that was also working out how particular traits of a particular disease had to do with odd black urine. Was apparently genetic in nature. And the very paper that was alluded to by Jeanson turns out to be available online. So you can see the whole bloody little thing. And it turns out that farther down that very same paper, he talks about nor are instances wanting of the influence of natural selection upon chemical processes, as for example, the production of such protective materials as the sepia of the cuttlefish and the odorous secretion of the skunk, not to mention the innumerable modifications of surface pigmentation. So when he's talking about what we would later be talking about as genes, and he had a different term for it, he was calling them a chemical individuality, it was within an evolutionary context. And he was proceeding from a natural selection point of view, which is so nice of you to bring up yet another scientist who did the pivotal work, who wasn't proceeding from a creationist design perspective. Thank you, Jeanson. So this goes on over and over and over again. It's a lesson that I have as a historian, that when people bring up old subject matter, take it with a grain of salt and investigate it, because sometimes they may be name dropping, as though, and they may not have actually researched the background on it. But I'm compulsive about this. You bring up a topic around me, whether it's the woolly mammoth sculptures or that, I want to find out about it. I want to find out who the people were, what work did they do, what happened to them after that, how did their ideas fare, and $9 to a hole in a donut, as my great grandmother would have said. You'll discover that there's more evolution side to it that somehow or other Jeanson neglects to bring up. So, and also for Lisa in there, notice that here's a 1902 article, and it's available online free. So you can discover that often people who are doing history of science or other areas, a lot of these very seminal papers are regarded as ones where they're open access thing. They put them up for everybody to see. Another area to remember on accessibility of material is you'll probably have a little better chance of getting technical material on topics in biological fields, particularly. So even if a paper shows up on Science and Nature, a lot of the subject matter they're bringing up is probably going to be available in other journals that are open access, especially for older material. So in genetics and evolution and that sort of thing, those journals, pretty much most of the fields that relate to biological subjects are increasingly open access. The ones that still are behind firewalls a lot are ones in geology and paleontology, where there's a much smaller number of people doing the work, and they don't exactly have the money bags that you can with pharmaceutical companies and big universities and research grants that allow that stuff to be made available openly, because there's tons of money to be made if you can figure out a new little disease, Tinky. And for that, you need to know about the genes, and you need to know about the biology and so forth and so on. So there's a different dynamic going on between that and you find in the other fields. I think physics papers tend to be generally available in that too. So astronomy stuff, I haven't found a great difficulty in locating primary source on that too, which is another topic that's going to be popping up in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. So we put that stuff up. I think that pretty well covers most of the linkages on that. One of the ones, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get open access, but I'll allude to what it was. Jeanson drew on this protein sequencing past and present paper from 1981 by a B. Foltman. And it was discussing a variety of things about plant evolution and that. And I would have put the linkage up to it if it had been open access, but it wasn't. But I was able to get it from another source. But the point is that Here he explicitly cites a work as a general description, and in it is a whole slew on aspartic proteinases as example of an enzyme superfamily, and how they were just starting to work out what the evolutionary sequence of those were, and how the different family members were developing by gene duplication and other stuff. And since that was in there, like he says, from these observations, we are now able to summarize the main features of the evolution of the gastric proteinases. A protozymogen for these proteinases was present before the evolution of vertebrates. This zymogen gave rise to several paralogous proteins, and among these we observe at least 3 types of proteinases that apparently were present before divergence of the mammals. And that's back in 1981. So here is yet another little blip that if we are to assume that Jeanson is not blind as a bat, theoretically he should know about this information. So if he brings up that subject or dances past that subject at any point and he doesn't bring up that information, then what's going on? Either he's blind as a bat or he's suppressing data. So that's another thing to keep going on there. Had it been a technical paper, it would have gone directly in the category that I keep for misrepresentations. So far, he's averaging about 1 source per page. He's stuck with that. He's got a very small number of technical ones that he stumbled over. I've got like 3 so far that I go, yeah, no, you're misrepresenting the information. Had this not been a general summary, it would have gone in that category as well, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on it and let him off the hook because it's a general descriptive piece. And then so far, most of the technical literature that he's come up with, which is only about a dozen so far, are ones where, yeah, he's not misrepresenting them. They're often very old and generic, or it's just something, it's like saying the sun rises in the east. Well, great news bulletin. So it's not something that's directly contentious. Now, I'm expecting things will get more amusing as we move into the stuff where he's actually unrolling his technical argument, and that will be the matter we get into there. We're nearing the half hour, so let me jump in because it's going to be Kent Hovind to cover the rest of the thing, which you always like to discuss. But let me thank my patrons on here. And boy, my tummy with 3 meals a day and full ink printer is a delight, and it's due to you patrons out there who have helped on this and stuck with me even during the COVID panic. I know full well that there's an awful lot of stress and nerves going around about this, and I have an advantage as a retiree that I don't have a job to be laid off from. And so I'm working off of the Patreon and book royalties and Social Security and the other things that go on that's working out. So anyway, you people at the patrons, you make a big difference for the old RJ here. So we got our colleagues, Hendril and Eric Rowley and Benjamin Simpson and Speed of Sound and Cirrus and Zeshi, and our researchers, Travis Adams, Ian Chen, the ubiquitous, wonderful Ian Chen, Convert Me, Eat Meal, James Fitzwater, History Minor, Ralph McFadden, Paula Gia, marvelous source methods guy, the bête noir of creationists, including Ken Ham. Our assistant researchers, Mike Apple, Duranko, and Totes Real. Our friends Daniel, Steve Bauman, a wonderful geologist, keeps us on the straight and narrow on our geology data for the books. Marigail Beddoes, Inzex, Cool, Devin Miranda Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus, Bo Hulbo, Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams, and legacy patrons, ones who were able to help in times past. I still want to give you a nod. Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Nyanya and Staggles, Sun Sky Stone, Ugly Trum and Truls, Everett Vincent and Sura Weissbaum. So all of you, thank you, oodles. I'm trying to do you proud on the data front. By the way, Jackson busy working today, otherwise he would have been up on the field. So I'll remind you that Jackson's channel, I learn stuff from him every single time. He has yet to do a video that I don't discover stuff that I didn't know before. He's very, very thorough and delightful. That's always the one that I'm most delightful in. The same way with Nick Zentner, the geologist. He was doing a show just recently on Spokane, where I live, the Spokane Geology. And yay, isn't that wonderful? And that too leads to things that I wasn't aware of in that before. So what everybody that wants to play online and learn that way, you should probably learn the skills of time management. to know who's really neat people that are like sources of the Nile, that they're workers in the field active. I follow a lot of them on Twitter. That's how I found out about that ceramic thing, because they're telling people in their networks about neat stuff, cutting edge material, new technical papers. That saves the old RJ and anybody that uses that same method from having to read everything. Oh no, that is not time in the world to do that. No. So you have find ways of having connective tendrils out there who can tripwire in new information, and then you can follow up on it if it's relevant to your particular area. So you'll want to pick ones that are in your own field of interest, and also areas that you think you really should be knowledgeable about. If, for example, you want to take on as a hobby slamming into creationists, there's a lot of areas that you need to be familiar with. And but instead of just simply following just willy-nilly, everybody, picking in and getting core groups that can be the most valuable usage of what is inevitably the limited number of time. I'm sure scientists, Mel, you do exactly the same thing in your educational procedure. You got to filter and figure out how to do things in ways that's going to get the maximum bang for the time. Yeah, that's the way it works.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so it's something, there's no rule book that you can follow on it. It's a thing you just have to kind of seat of your pants to get to the point of, am I spending too much time watching videos where I don't learn anything versus ones where you go, wow, that was 15 minutes well spent.
Engagement is really important. When on my on my first master's, my research was linking content mastery to content interest. You would think that would make sense, but there wasn't a way to actually measure that just yet. And I sorted out how to do it, and I based my instruction as well as the assignments on the 4 Lubinsky personalities to try to hit each personality type and allow them a choice for engagement.
And they each have slightly different approach vectors as to how you're supposed to be dealing with them.
Right. So to navigate that.
Lubinsky personalities?
Yeah, the Lubinsky, Lubinski.
There are categories of ways that people think, and they focus on different kinds of things. And so one sort of argument that will be perfectly valid for one group is just going to just go blank related to another.
Speaking of which, what would mine be, since I like to calculate woo scenarios that usually end up with the planet being destroyed?
Okay, so the different personalities, you had your artistic types. Okay, you have your artistic types. You have your talkers, the people who like to talk. You have your problem solvers, the mathy types, and then you had the real world scenario types. And so what I did is I managed to come up with a way to quantify it based on previous scores associated with their with their previous knowledge in science. I did surveys. I asked them if they enjoyed science. And so I didn't try to figure out the individual kid so much as I did blanket and say, I'm going to develop activities as well as instruction that will allow these students to at least target these 4 different types of personalities. And I did that. And so my instruction was, videos, sound, music. I had them get up, I had them talk to each other. And then I also diversified the assignments and allowed them to choose. So based on their own personalities, they picked what they did. Mm-hmm. And they could work in groups if they wanted to. So that knocked out the talkers. And then I had real world scenarios. And then I had an artistic option. And then I also had the math engineering hands-on type. You know what I mean? So that's what I meant by
math. A little bit of everything then.
Right. But see, as a public school teacher, they want you to diversify your instruction to where you would hit that anyway. So if you preset your year with stuff like that, you just roll it out and it just becomes secondhand nature. But that's pretty much what I do on my science channel, is kind of similar. And I just hit it with all those, try to do those different personalities, and I try to engage at least in that way. Yeah.
I noticed it
Also,
comes out to mostly me being, hey, how badly would this mangle the planet? Oh, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, crap, crap. Well, in the old Spaceballs term, oh shit. There
well,
goes the planet.
there's the matter that's kind of thing that interests you on that, and you can learn an awful lot about mathematics and a lot of different geology and other kinds of things to deal with that. Another bit for the education end of it, and it's one of the reasons why I've been focusing a lot on Nick Zentner's geology series that he's been doing from his backyard, and the cozy fort of cloth that he puts up so that you can show videos and stuff out there, is that he's just a gobsmackingly good explainer. And he uses ways of analogies and terminology that are that get lodged in your brain to make it easy to remember what's going on. So now, because of him, I know that you've got the Columbia basalt, which he calls the German chocolate cake, the Grand Ronde, which is huge, vast, thick deposits. They're super hard. That's the undercurrent of all the real estate around in here. Then he's got the crinkle cut French fries that are the different form of geology. That's a different kind of volcanic stuff that's come up higher on the thing, and that's more erodible. And then there's the Tootsie Rolls up on the top. that's yet another kind of squishy volcanic material that has a very different constituency. And it's ways that he reinforces and uses those very, very effectively. And so a good analogy, particularly one that can be verbal, to where you can use visual cues and maps and charts and stuff as convenient, but it means also that you can carry them portable in your head. And I think theoretically any area, whether it's biology, genetics, cosmology, all of these, you can come up with impressions, even the term spaghettification that's relating to when you're sucked into a black hole. All of those things are I think, effective ways to do that. And I try in my own end, in terms of source methods, to try to come up with phrases, catchphrases and bits, the Tortugan concept of the mind, bing, things bounce right off of them. Bits about the no cousins rule, the origins or bust concept, all of these things as ways to focus where the structure of the argument is. And then you can bring up specific examples along the way. So it's a thing where there's no set of rules, but you find out what works better than other things and to coordinate stuff. And it also makes it easier to remember the things that you need to remember. All of that is a key to how people interact on YouTube's. At least that's what I would prefer it to be. That I'm a talking head in my den. I don't have the splashy graphics the way a lot of other people do. Jackson puts up videos and graphics. He works on it much harder than I do and gets more people to watch them for that very reason. And the same thing with Paula Gia and others who do just delicious visuals. Gutsick Gibbon is just marvelous because she's a cartoonist, and so she brings up these delightful bits and the use of music. There's so many different ways that people can do stuff. And so I probably, unless I partnered up with somebody that can do those sort of shtick, I'm probably going to be stuck in this talking head mode. But nevertheless, spread the word about source methods to be able to get other people into the field of things. John Perry, he's another one that is fascinated with the whole issue of visualization and how to use graphics. Nick Zentner was bringing that up along the way of how do you visualize geological processes through visual graphics. And so he's connecting up with people that way. So that the ones who are more technical savvy than I am as an old fart, you potentially can do wonders in figuring out how to bring data fields together and visualize them graphically in real time with motion to get 2, 3, 4-dimensional things. When you're dealing with time, you're dealing with the fourth dimension, to try to figure out lots of things that are hard to convey. Biological processes, certainly, you realize that, scientist Mel, that you've got proteins being made, and then you've got regulatory sequences and epigenetic markers with methylation, and you've got this vast, and it's all happening at blinding speed inside of the cell too. So all of these things, how to slow that down and conceptualize what's going on. You can use color and shape and structure so that it's something that if a technical person is watching it, they'll understand what it is in the same way. And the non-technical person would be going, oh, okay, that's what's going on. So this is a shout out to anybody that's in a graphics mode mentality. use your shit. Figure out how to deploy your tools to either do material yourself or to help people who are the clumsy oafs like me to explain things better and better and better, and to make information easier to access, so that that vast tidal wave of science out there can be formulated in a way that can make it as accessible as possible to people to light their imaginations on fire. That should be the principle of it. And then they can then run off in the various directions on that. So there's my little preachy on the importance of the arts and explanatory models and the like in scientific endeavor, because everybody that's ever attended a lecture that's technically accurate and wonderful, but it may put you to sleep. You're taking down information. I have no problem with a lecture that I'm going, this person is never going to set the house on fire, but boy, the information in it is magnificent. But the ones that blow me away are the clever ones that can merge that engagement with their audience, the students or the people watching the video, and be scientifically accurate at the same time. And it's a skill that not everyone can do, but collectively we can probably do it. So that's, I think, the wave of the future. I'd love to see things where the toolkits are made more and more accessible, and the way people cooperate are more and more accessible. We, in many ways, we're going through a process that's kind of forcing us to do that because of the quarantining. So this is probably something, scientists, Mel, you can nod your head if it's sounding like we're probably going to have to do more and more of this anyway.
Yes, I quote Jurassic Park, hold on to your butts, because it's gonna get worse.
This is going to, and we have the advantage, though, that we have an accessibility of toolkits and skill sets that are amazing. It just is we don't yet know how to connect enough of them together and put the pieces together, but we'll learn, we'll figure it all out. I think so. I think, and it makes the future terribly exciting, because unless we blow ourselves to smithereens or go extinct because we global warmed ourselves to death, or go into some idiot things where people who shouldn't be running governments keep on running governments and muck up things. We know those things can happen. I don't want to be the equivalent of somebody in the 4th century looking forward to centuries of progress in the Roman world, when in fact it's going to be doom for them. But if we can get past that, we've got so much potential, because we're just scratching the surface on so many things. There's so many things in biology and paleontology and astronomy. We're just now peeking out to where we can see more and more about extrasolar systems and the like. It's just exciting. A brand new paper that just came out on the biological systems for underlying what Luca was doing, and what kind of dynamics was going on in the cell replication system there. And a new paper by Sunderland was just working out more that the argument of DNA versus RNA, it apparently hadn't occurred to them, maybe it can be doing both at the same time. And it turns out there's a new hypercycle involving partial RNA and DNA components that can generate a replicator, that they've just been coming out on. And that so people were looking in the wrong direction to think it needs to be just this or just that. And there'll be more work going on in that area. So I want to be around as long as possible to keep my eyeballs on all this stuff, because it's really fun. We've learned more in the last 30 years than in the last 300 years before that. And most of the working paleontologists are alive now. Most of the working biologists and scientists are alive now and doing work. We're just getting started, kids. Anyway, to part number 2, which is Kent Hovind, our dear Kent Hovind, the Donald Trump of creationism. I did a posting on that right after Trump was elected, and I didn't mean it as a joke. I meant it as a bitter piece of humor, but true. And it's turned out to be the case. Anyway, Kent Hovind has decided, now that he is free from the jail thing, he is suing the US government for $500 million for his experience of being persecuted by the government.
Really now? Is he?
Really now.
I'm gonna sue you.
And I put the link up to Riley over at Forbes magazine, who has been following Kent Hovind. If you're on Facebook, there's even a Kent Hovind following the stupid of Kent Hovind page on Facebook, that various people who don't like Kent Hovind, including moi, get involved with one another. And Peter Riley gets involved with that. Anyway, he's had a slew of postings going back years and years and years, and he's followed every little in and out of the legal squabbles that Kent Hovind has. And so if you look him up,
would it be safe that Kent Hovind is suing the U.S. government for $500 million?
Yes, $500 million. Yes.
I was trying to do a Dr. Evil.
I mean, you got to do this. Yes, Dr. Evil. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There we go. That's it. Yeah. But yeah, the audacity of the little twerp is amusing, and it's going to be intriguing to see. He's as unrepentant and contrite as Donald Trump was after his impeachment. The temperament between the two, they're both people who have Dunning-Kruger sense of their own brilliance, who really know very little. They're remarkably ignorant, clumsy people. They're cheats and fools and poltroons. What the hell can you do on this kind of thing? I have no respect for either one of them. But anyway, so we apprise of the attention on this, and it's going to presumably be covered as it goes through the court. And it will not be. I will not be prejudicing the circumstance to say that I hope he gets the book thrown at him again, and he has to pay legal fees and all the rest for such a frivolous thing. Good gravy, $500 million. Anyway, so we have any
Oh, well, Ian Chen in the chat. I'm sorry, RJ and D-Lane. I can't listen to this live after work, but I can't wait to listen later.
Easily done. That's a nice advantage about the fact that stuff that's get on. And I'll often get postings. I get little flashes on Google Chrome about current videos that pop up. And I have to confess, like with Lisa for Truth, they go on the triage list, and I go, oh, I don't have time to get to that yet. Oh my God, that thing's 2.5 hours long. I definitely don't have time to get to that yet.
Hold on, I found a creation seminar thing from Kent Hovind thanks to Forbes, and I might look into that and say,
oh, he's all over the place. There's zones of Kent Hovind. There's the zone that he did before he went to jail. So these are stuff that he was doing from the 1980s on, and a lot of the material is in the 1990s. And he was very prolific. He would go around preaching, and they would tend to videotape a lot of these things in front of often extremely small audiences. And a lot of these things have gotten cycled up on the field. Then we went to prison for the tax evasion, comes out, gets back into the field, moves into a different state, sets up his new dinosaur land, and starts doing new lectures. And then he's gone to, rather than doing lectures in front of audiences so much anymore, the most recent material he's been doing, at least as far as I can tell for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, is just basically from his den. And he's got his probably green screen at times, but most of the time he's got his stuff around, his little SpongeBob figures, and he's got a globe and various little props and stuff that he sticks around, his shark jaw and the like. And is a talking head just like me. Difference being that I put sources up and he doesn't. So anyway, a lot of that, if you can easily be intimidated by the sheer volume of Kent Hovind. But
now,
bear in mind,
if I were to ever go up against him, the first thing I go after is, of course, the flood, because you know how I love my woo scenarios.
Oh, well, he's got 2 main hobby horses. One is the flood, to some extent cosmology issues, but the big bit is evolution issues. Evolution fairy tale for grown-ups. Now the thing is, looking up his seminar series, you will realize that what you get with Kent Hovind in 2020 is pretty much what he was been doing in all of those old seminars. So it won't be a waste of time, although you may want to bang your head against a wall if you watch lots and lots of the seminars, because you're getting an awful lot of the same claptrap over and over again. Now,
that might be what Dapper does.
Source methods issues here is look to take notes for the claims he makes, and does he offer sources for them? Now, he is addicted to PowerPoints, particularly in the more recent lectures. So you can see him putting up a slide, and there will be authority quote, and he'll often have it highlighted in yellow, the parts that are important. And then there may or may not be a reference down below. Pay real close attention to all of that, because he's copying shit out of other creationists. That's where he's being a parasite.
Now, of course, if I were to go up against him, I'd probably do the same whole slideshow thing just to take the piss out of him at first. And then it's like, all right, so here's the whole physical properties of every single idea Kent Hovind is claiming. And I'd probably start going into a long-winded thing where
well, there he will
same.
Dance. He'll tap dance around you, Tornado, under those circumstances. Long-winded is a different thing than gish galloping. And what you need to do in what I did in my debate, and what Bill Ludlow did in his, Bill Ludlow made use of slides. He made a point of studying what Kent had previously written on, claimed about paleontology, and was there ready to counter those specific points. And because Kent is not a particularly original creationist, he's a copyist, he'll tend to repeat the same shit over and over again. So you want to, in a way, wave a probability angle as to what is the most likely claptrap that Kent will field in the course of a particular topic, because he will focus on particular topics. He tends to want to debate in a fixed debate format, which you can use to your advantage, because the neat thing about a fixed format rather than a conversation is that your opponent has to shut up at some point. So that means you get to present your argument, and if you've structured it properly, you can hit strong. What you want to do on any of these issues is to know his data field better than he does. You need to track down his source base.
Like you did?
Like I did, and anyone else can. Remember that he copies a lot from Walt Brown. So of any random claim that pops up in a Kent Hovind video, you probably got anywhere from 50 to 75% that it's going to be something he cribbed from Walt Brown. And the older the claim, the more likely that that's to be true, because he's just scavenged that. And all of Walt Brown's material, I think it's called In the Beginning, it's all available online. So you can see Walt Brown's source base. And of course, then you can find out the various critics of that source base that have been popping along down the line, which of course, I don't think ever Kent really pays a hell of a lot of attention to. Another thing you can do that's more general is to undermine his credibility among his audience, because it's just a fact. Kent Hovind is a fringe of creationism. He's not relied on by any major creationist that I know of anywhere. You don't find Kent Hovind lectures being referenced by Andrew Snelling or Nathaniel Jeanson or any of these top guns in there, because they regard him as somebody that's just, your crazy uncle that you don't want to pay attention to. And you can, if you ever debate at Kent Hovind, don't let him preen about his credentials. He doesn't have a real doctorate in the sciences. He didn't really teach at a regular school.
I'd shut his shit down on there. It's like, and before we get started, I'd like to note that my opponent does not have an accredited diploma, or he did not get his diploma from an accredited university. It was from a diploma mill, and
Patriot
he hasn't
University,
taught in an accredited institution for 15 years, so he has no excuse to claim that he's an actual doctor. It's a lie, and I'll get to that when we get there.
Yeah, and I made a point of that. I'm always annoyed at anybody who debates Kent Hovind in a context where Hovind is introduced as Dr. Hovind. And you don't want to let him get away with that. No, I'm terribly sorry. Some people could be called doctor, but you're not one of them, because you didn't really get a doctorate, not in the sciences.
Of course, my term for him would be, now, of course, we're going to look at totally not a doctor, Kent Hovind.
Yeah, there's various ways of doing it. The other matter is the hardest thing to do in any debate with any doctrinal nitwit is if they're prone, they've got their patter down, so you can anticipate some of that, but also they will have the steamroller bluster and the ability to focus in, particularly in the Q&A section and the back and forth section, to try to focus in on identifiable source details where they've really screwed up, and to get them
Like the
onto
flood?
that turf, which Kent Hovind does all the time. He doesn't fact check a damn thing. That's what I did in my debate. I pointed out how he cribbed a whole section out of Harin Yahya, and I called him a bottom feeder, and he didn't like that at all. And he was completely derailed from his usual PowerPoint pattern. And so I regard that as a success. He wasn't able to just trot out his usual argument, which he is typically able to do against top-down thinkers who he can just flip aside as well. It's their worldview and it's their dogma, and they're going to say that anyway. And that's far removed from his source base. Aaron Rod doesn't even do much in the way of source basing with Kent Hovind, but that's methods issue is the Achilles heel way before you get to the content level. The other advantage that you have in a particular area is to focus on areas that you know really well and to target your response on that. A tornado, these are all skills you'll need to do to be concise and to be able to avoid repetition, to work out so when you hit, you want to have in your head Wile E. Coyote versus a Roadrunner, to where when you have a single focused anvil and you know exactly where you're going to drop it, and you do it and get it out of the way, and then deal with the splatter afterwards. And it's an art form that you have to learn, and the ability to improvise. I had a little bit of an advantage here because I came with a little bit of theater background. So I was already good at least speaking. I wasn't frustrated being on video and all that sort of thing. But the hardest part in any live debate is to keep quick tabs on the back and forth, because if your opponent, and Kent Hovind is obvious case here, makes an egregiously stupid statement right in front of you, particularly if they're improvising, they're kind of winging their data field farther than they should, the ability to catch that on the fly is really tricky. And I know in the heated debate that can be very, very difficult. It is interesting that in one of Kent's debates, he was bringing up woolly mammoths, and the point was Jackson was in the live chat. And he was able to spot, wait a minute, this thing about mammoths not having sebaceous glands. And he was able to do research on the fly that way and track down the fact that he had just got the fact wrong, partly because he was relying on Walt Brown and all of that. So eventually you can tidy up all the material. If you have rematches, which I would say the great measure of a skilled debate is the person you debated with so dislikes the experience they had, they'll never want to debate you again. So you may never get a second chance. I've never had another debate with Kent Hovind. I wonder why.
Oh, yeah, Kent ran away from a debate with Dapper and Erica.
What about conspiracy cats?
Yeah, him too.
Yeah, you get that, and that's a measure of the thing. He prefers to have fresh meat to fillet. Now, then the other approach where methods comes in is to prepare the fresh meat. So if you know that Kent Hovind is going to be debating with somebody, contact them if they're available on social media so that you can prep them as much as possible, so that you can get them to employ good source methods, that you can get them with a deployment of anvils ready to drop, and so that they can deal with it on the fly. And if Kent Hovind and anyone like Kent Hovind discovers that as the network gets better and more connected, that they can't pull off their tricks anymore because somebody that's going to respond to them is going to be able to do it real time. And they will never be able to get any headway because they're always getting an anvil dropped on them in their discussions. That's the ideal goal. And I don't see any reason why we can't pull that trick off, because nobody is ever going to accuse Kent Hovind of being an original analytical thinker. He is a low-level, bottom-feeding secondary parasite. He doesn't come up with an original thought in his life, not even the Hovind theory, which is a slightly modified ice canopy turned into snowball model. In case you didn't know this, scientist Mel, Kent Hovind has the idea that there was this giant comet ice ball thing that comes in and splats down and produces all the asteroids and all this kind of stuff and the flood. He is always promising to do a detailed analysis of the Hovind theory, but it never quite gets to the point of where anybody can actually see it anywhere. So it's a coming attraction like, like Second Coming.
Oh, what gets even better is I actually debunked the atomic snowball. That's what I'm calling it from now on, the atomic snowball.
That's a good one because it's got a lot of problems knocking around on it. It's a cousin. It's a cousin to the ice canopy theory, which was knocking around in creationist circles back in the 1960s.
Oh, RJ, you have
and
no
I think
idea.
that's where Kent Hovind got it from.
RJ, you have no idea. I actually ran the numbers on it, and the fireball generated from the impact of a 200 by 200 by 200 kilometer ice cube, or in my demonstration, the 248
the super slushy
wide, a 248 kilometer wide snowball impacting the Earth at cometary speed. The fireball from that would exceed the diameter of the Earth. Just the radius of the fireball exceeds the diameter of the Earth.
Oh, yeah. And as Erica pointed out in one of her recent videos on this heat problem, it's not just that, it's everything they try to appeal to is running up against thermodynamic problems. That the argument that all the asteroids could be formed from like impact events on the Earth, splattering them out and making all the stuff in the moons of the other planets all came about. You know, if you start calculating the energy and then add in all the impact craters that we know hit the planet and having them all having to take place at once, and then there's the accelerated radioactive decay that has to take place. It just keeps. You start shooting up the little E thing on your scientific calculator starts getting razor burns at that point.
No. What that little E thing? At that point, you might as well say, "Well, congratulations, Kent Hovind. Your claimed hypothesis has just exceeded the gravitational binding energy of the planet." In baseball's terms,
Noah put on little mufflers to protect them from that. Jerry Penna asked, why is the used car salesman suing the government? Well, to follow the metaphor, he was caught trying to sell cars without actually providing the car.
Yeah.
They're fussy that way.
Hey, Scientist Mel, do you mind if I share my screen? Because I have something perfect for it. I was going to show you the effects of the atomic snowball.
I bet it looks
that might
burnt.
mess it up, but if
I know that she's got difficulties of being able to do screen sharing and all that on there, so you'll have to put that up. You need to get a website and that way you can screen share away.
I'm going to send it to TD Lane, who can send it to Mel, who can send it to
Yeah.
But the upshot is that we know that all the various ad hoc rescue mechanisms, to borrow the phrase that Snelling and Standing for Truth like
just
to use,
make it even worse.
Any one of them is a deal breaker, but that all of them have to function pretty much at the same time, and they don't actually explain the data either. But nonetheless, they're sidebar. And the thing is that creationists in the young Earth creationist community know this is a problem. They just don't like to call attention to it. So it gets buried in the footnotes down there where they're basically scratching their heads like Laurel and Hardy going, oh, heat. Yes, there is a little problem with that heat thing. Yeah, well, we're working on that. We're working on that. You're trying to produce a perpetual motion machine in effect, and it's never going to work.
Well, the issue is with all those simultaneous things having to happen all at once, eventually the little E on my scientific calculator would get to such a degree that, well, it would exceed the gravitational binding energy of the Earth, methinks.
Yeah, well, we're at the end of the hour. I'd see if there's any other questions knocking around in here. Apparently we've dealt with all of that part. The upshot is keep an eye out for what Kent Hovind's lawsuit's going to be doing. It's going to be hitting the fan somewhere down the line.
Excuse me while I grab my popcorn.
Is he getting real live lawyers to do this, or is he going to be his own lawyer? It's hard to tell. And as when you've seen the connections that Hovind had in the legal department that was followed by Riley at Forbes going back years, we put a bunch of references to them in The Rocks Were There, and I think I alluded to it in Evolution Slam Dunk too. And you'll find a lot of them in the bibliography at my tip website as well. he was relying on a bunch of weird lawyers that believe in that weird kind of semi-dominionist government isn't really legit, and you don't have any right to Texas, and go away bit. And needless to say, this did not do well in the actual legal circumstances. So whether or not he's going to try the same shtick here, whether it might even be thrown out of court before it even gets anywhere, and some judge is just going to go, "Patooey," I don't know.
I've got
It'll
that
be a
picture,
circus.
if you want to see it, RJ. I've got the picture that was sent to me from Tornado.
Oh, okay. If you can put it up without causing conniptions on the stream,
I can. So I'll share it with you so you can see. Here you go. The flood of Noah.
Yes, it looks like a scene from a Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
It basically, all of Kent Hovind's ideas inevitably end up with the same result when it comes to the flood of Noah.
Yeah. And it's not
smooth, glowy marble.
It's not just Kent Hovind. All the ones who defend accelerated radioactive decay, which would be all the gang at the rate group. Snelling still trots that out every once in a while up at AIG and ICR. They're all facing the same boat. Every one of these things has numbers that go tilt when you try to figure out what the actual effects of these things are going to be. Some of them are so colossal they'd vaporize the planet in a hurry.
Yeah, basically every single one of the ideas used to defend the Noachian flood ends up with a smooth, glowy marble of a planet. At which point, you might as well say, well, the Earth did get flooded. It got flooded by magma, and now there's nothing that's ever going to be happening anywhere ever again.
And that would be assuming they could ever actually make sense of all the geology material, which if you read The Rocks Were There, you'll discover they don't. And the same thing will be going for volume 2. So I think that puts us, we're over the hour on that. Otherwise, we're just going to be dithering on indefinitely. Thank you, scientist Mel. You didn't even have to use your little writing board.
No, I didn't. And only you can see me and my writing board. Nobody else can. So I could have said all kinds of things to you.
Oh, dear.
Did anyone say anything about the smooth, glowy marble?
Other than it would be a smooth, glowy marble.
From chat.
Okay. See y'all next week, gang.
See ya.
Night.
We off the air?